Thank you, sir. How are you employed?
Detective Lieutenant with the Oakland County Sheriff's Office.
How long have you been with the Oakland County Sheriff's Office?
Approaching 28 years.
Okay. You said you're a detective lieutenant right now?
Yes.
Tell us please what that means.
I oversee a handful of divisions within the Sheriff's Office, the Special Investigations Unit, which I know we've mentioned at court, the Fugitive Apprehension Team, our Computer Crimes, which Detective Wodrowski had worked for, and our Warrants Division.
Okay. And we'll get into some of that in a little more detail. Is it fair to say that you're the officer in charge in this case, or one of the officers in charge?
Yes, that's fair to say.
Just to clear something up quickly, when James Crumbley was arrested on December the 4th, 2021, did he have any injuries?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. Now, going back to your role as Detective Lieutenant, we've talked a little bit about the Special Investigative Unit. Can we talk a little bit more detail about that?
Yeah.
Okay, so tell us please, what sort of cases would a member of the Special Investigative Unit handle?
Yeah, so the Special Investigations Unit is a support services arm of the Sheriff's Office. So we take a lot of requests from other agencies, from our own substations. Oftentimes we handle political cases, complex cases, high-profile cases, things of that nature.
Okay, and prior to your current role, what other roles did you have with the Oakland County Sheriff's Office?
Yeah, prior to my role as the Detective Lieutenant, Special Investigations, I was also the Detective Lieutenant in charge of our Auto Theft Unit, our Friend of the Court Division, our Arson Division.
Okay. I'd like to direct your attention to November the 30th, 2021.
Okay,
Do you remember that day?
I do.
Were you notified of an active shooter situation at Oxford High School that afternoon?
Yes,
Can you tell us, please, where you were when you were made aware of that?
I was actually at the prosecutor's office at the time. I was made aware discussing another matter. The prosecutor and her chief assistant came in and advised me that there had been a shooting at the Oxford High School.
So what did you do with that? What did you do next?
For context, about, I don't know, a couple months before that, we had a false alarm, if you will, at another school. So initially, that was immediately what I went to. This is probably another false alarm. But I picked up my phone and I made a phone call. I've thought about it a million times. I have no idea who I called, but I do remember the response was, "This is a real thing. This is real."
Okay. So tell us what you did, please.
I obviously, ran downstairs or took the elevator downstairs, ran to my vehicle, and immediately proceeded to the Oxford High School with my lights and sirens activated.
Okay. Do you recall the approximate time you would have arrived at Oxford High School?
I think around 1:20 in the afternoon, approximately.
Okay. Tell us what you saw as you arrived on scene.
There was the largest emergency first response that I've ever seen in my career, and second place isn't even close. When I got there, there were students were being evacuated, and more and more officers were rushing in. EMS was on scene. I vaguely recall our helicopter flying above. It was just something I'd only seen on TV before. Nothing I'd ever experienced.
Okay. So at that point in time when you arrived, was the scene still active?
It was, yes.
I'm going to show you what's been admitted as People's 9. Is that screen in front of you working?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So this is a map of the Oxford High School?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And as you pull up on scene, you made those observations. Tell us where you went next.
Just understand there's a lot of the day that I don't recall very well, so I don't remember where I parked. But I do remember going through the front office entrance area. It would be, you see office 200. That door right there, yeah.
This door right
Yeah,
here?
I do remember going through there. It was being held open by officers, and that's where I met then Lieutenant Todd Hill, who was the incident commander.
Okay, what's an incident commander?
So Lieutenant Hill had assumed incident command because, as you can imagine, I explained to you, there was so much disorganization in the early. I mean, we had no idea what we were responding to. My police radio was blowing up with calls of, we think there's an additional shooter here. We think someone's fleeing from the scene here. I mean, it was chaos. So Lieutenant Hill assumed that role and started organizing resources for the sweeps of the school, for any secondary explosive devices or any additional shooters, to identify victims, things of that nature. So that was going on as I had arrived at the school.
Okay. So we've identified you as, and you've identified yourself as the officer in charge of the investigation.
That's correct.
That's different than incident commander, though?
Yes, the incident commander's role, I mean, especially in a case like this, because of the hundreds of emergency first responders that were flooding into the school, Lieutenant Hill, he's a captain now, so if I use him interchangeably, but Lieutenant Hill at the time handled the securing of the building, and evacuating wounded, injured, and because of my role in the Special Investigations Unit, the fact is that I was in charge of the Special Investigation Unit at the time, I assumed the role of the investigative lead, which is often referred to as the officer in charge.
Okay, if you could please give us a little bit of an idea of what an officer in charge typically does in a case.
So, an officer in charge of an investigation typically, at its most basic, we investigate the scene, meaning we determine what property needs to be, or what evidence needs to be collected, what witnesses need to be identified and spoken to, identifying potential victims, things of that nature. We also work with the prosecutor's office to determine charging, whatever charges, if any, that are going to come from the incident.
Okay. Now, would it be fair to say that in this particular case, there's a massive amount of information that was reviewed?
Yeah, so one of the more problematic things about this case is the amount of information that was coming in. If you can imagine social media tips and emails and everything like that, 911 calls coming in. It was information overload, and all the best we could do was just try to process things as they came.
Okay. Now, so it would be fair to say that you have reviewed the evidence in this case, at least in a supervisory role.
Yes, that's correct.
All right. I'm going to start off with your testimony where we left off the last few witnesses, and I'll go through the exhibits that have been admitted already. This is Exhibit 361. So a little bit of background here, sir. Were you made aware that the defendant, James Crumbley, and his wife, Jennifer Crumbley's phones were seized the evening of November the 30th? Yes,
as part of the, if I can back up just a second.
Sure.
So as the OIC, there was a point in time where I advised, and it was just announced basically, that if you're an investigator, come see me, because I knew there were so many things jobs that needed to be done. So a handful of investigators were sent to different hospitals, area hospitals, whether we knew that there were victims there or not. We had some reason to believe that there were victims being shipped everywhere. Lieutenant Marsban was handling, once the shooter was identified, handling the scene at the shooter's address. Special Agent Brandon had come up to assist me in identifying the murder weapon. So there was just, and I actually had a scribe next to me just jotting down as fast as she could when I would make an assignment. who was doing it and what the assignment was, because it was just,
Oh, it's-
there was a ton of information.